Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Welcome to the webinar, the panel, which is a hybrid in mode. Some people will be joining us here, obviously observing the COVID SOPs. And we have online our guest speaker, and the participant. First of all, I would like to introduce the panelists, then we'll give a briefer on the panel, and then I would request our guests to speak on that. We will be having at the end our Minister, Ms. Zartaj Sahiba, Minister of State for Climate Change. Ms. Zartaj is a Pakistani politician who is currently Minister of State for Climate Change since 5th October 2018. She has been a member of the National Assembly since August 2018. She belongs to North Waziristan, but she was elected from South Punjab. We'll be listening to her. She was in Glasgow as well. Let's hear from her later on. Then we have our guests who will give us special remarks. We have Dr. Mushtaq Ahmed Memon, Regional Coordinator, Resource Efficiency, UNESCAP, Bangkok, Thailand. Dr. Memon is working with the United Nations Environmental Program as a regional coordinator for resource efficiency in Asia and Pacific office located in Bangkok. He is supporting resource efficiency, sustainable consumption and production, green economy, green financing, sustainable public procurement, sustainable tourism, sustainable industries, and various areas for Asia and Pacific region. Dr. Memon is also project manager for the regional policy advocacy component of the EU-funded Switch Asia program to promote sustainable consumption and production and uptake of SDG 12 in Asia. Dr. Memon has been our main supporter when SDPI has a program on World Environment Day launch with the government of Pakistan, and simultaneously we launched the Decade of Ecosystem Restoration that ultimately gave us the idea of having this panel in this conference. Thank you, Dr. Memon, for joining us online from Bangkok. It's early, I know. Then we have Adam Savelli from the Mr. Adam Savelli served jointly as Climate Change, Agriculture Policy and Investment Analyst on the Alliance of Diversity and International Center for Tropical Agriculture's Climate Advisory Services team, and as a visiting researcher for a consultative group on international agriculture research, focus climate security. So he has joined us also online. Then we have Mr. Iftikhar Abbas. Mr. Iftikhar Abbas is Program Policy Officer with the World Food Program Pakistan. He has analytical skills in data visualization, context analysis, and technical knowledge of food security, nutrition, and market prices dynamics. He is also joining us online. Then we have Dr. Sehrish. She will also be joining online from Lahore. Dr. Sehrish is Assistant Professor at Pakistan Navy War College, Lahore, Pakistan. She is member of International Studies Association, USA, and her research interests include national security and warfare studies. She also had, several studies done on counter-violent extremism and peace building in Pakistan. So she looks at the resilient part of it. Now we are happy that she's here, and she'll be speaking on the post-pandemic blue economy, a contribution towards ecosystem restoration 2030 and sustainable socioeconomic development. Then we have Dr. Babar Shahbaz from University of Agriculture, Faisalabad. Dr. Babar is Associate Professor at the Institute of Agriculture, Extension and Rural Development and Director Academics at the University of Agriculture, Faisalabad. He has served as Chair Outreach Program at the US-Pakistan Center for Advanced Studies in Agriculture and Food Security at the Faisalabad University. He's a visiting research fellow of SDPI as well. With a doctorate degree in Agriculture Extension, Rural Development and specialization in rural livelihoods, NRM, Agriculture Extension and Rural Development, Dr. Shahbaz has coordinated various inter and transdisciplinary research projects funded by international and local agencies. I would like to welcome Dr. Shahbaz, who is also online. We were expecting Dr. Fateh Mari, the Vice Chancellor of Sindh University of Tandojam, but he was asked for a meeting to join in Sindh government. So he was traveling, so he regretted that because of that meeting, he may not join us. But next time, or he may send us some of the messages for the conference. He has served as a chief economist and provincial coordinator for donor-funded project in the government of Sindh. Then we have Mr. Salman Danish, research associate with SDPI. He has done a paper for the UNEP, decade launch and ecosystem restoration. He contributed the paper on marine ecosystem of Pakistan. So he will be presenting his paper, policy paper here in this conference. He had done his master's in international development from UK, and he had served as program manager with the think tank JDHR. And he also specializes in resilience to community resilience to violence and disasters. So we will have this panel with us today. Starting, I would request Mr. Memon later on. I will just give the concept of this panel basically. As I just mentioned, that Pakistan was chosen to host the World Environment Day this year, 2021 in June. And it was the time when UN has also launched the Decade on Ecosystem Restoration. So in this background and context, at that time, we have decided that we will take it further and also hold this panel because ecosystem restoration is important. Now, when we see that our environment, our climate is being hitting us badly in terms of health and otherwise sustainability and resilience. In the background of the COVID, particularly, we see that we cannot survive if we are not looking at the aspects which ultimately provide the nature-based solution. And that if we are thinking of nature-based solution, then certainly we will look for restoration of our ecosystem, which is very important for the humanity. With the launch, I guess Memon Sahib would speak more on the decade and its launch, but probably the bottom line message for ecosystem restoration and observance of the decade is that in next 10 years, from 2021 to 2030, which is also coinciding with the SDG targets, that we have to do 10 big action. We have to take 10 big action to restore ecosystem where we have to live. Ecosystem, it ranges from forest to farmland to freshwater, ocean, coast, mountain, and other many areas, pitland and urban lands. So these are the resources of the nature or the system. Together they call ecosystem, which actually we have to think of restoring it. With this brief note, I would request now Dr. Memon for his special remarks on this issue. Over to you, Dr. Memon.
Thank you. Thank you. Good morning, colleagues and friends at SDPI and everyone. So as the challenge with this hybrid or online has come bigger, that we may not be dedicated like supporting one event, as now I had to jump quickly to our event in Korea. So this is how we are in the new norm of the situations, that how we really work more efficiently. So now, before I jump out, let me quickly put this first to congratulate Pakistan for hosting a wonderful World Environment Day, and that was also the launch of the ecosystem UN Decade for Ecosystem Restoration. And big thanks to SDPI and IUCN colleagues who really manage all the events on the behalf of United Nations Environment Program. Now, taking cue from there, that how the ecosystem restoration, this UN Decade, and aligned with the also Decade of Action for the Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs, and also align with the COP26 decisions we just finished, and align with the COP on the biodiversity, which is like a part 1 already online was happened, and next year we have in China. So how this all is happening, that there's like quite a bit of a myth about the ecosystem restoration, as per the phrase or the name is, that people think about the restoring the marine life, restoring the rivers, restoring the forests, highlands, deserts, and so on. But that is not stand-alone projects or the programs. Basically, it's way of our life, like sustainable development. So it comes with every action we take, whether it be on the production side, and take anything in the production, take the textiles, take the food, take the automobiles, take the mobile phones, take the housing, anything you talk about the production, energy, whatever you talk. How we producing the things? Like energy, suppose out of COVID, there's a lot of stimulus packages are coming, and especially focusing on the exports. And again, energy is one of the biggest challenges in Pakistan even for the export industry. So how we are bringing our production of energy, like a renewable energy per se, as a green energy, or we call the green recovery out of a COVID. So basically, when we look on the whole, our production systems, and then also how we consume, whether we are using the energy efficient lighting, whether we are really efficiently use the energy that we have, and also whether we are, let's say, going to the electric mobility from the fossil fuels, so electric vehicles and so on. And this goes with everything, with the food systems, with the textiles, you name it, housing and so on, even water and so forth. So when you look on the sustainable consumption and production, basically that helps to restore the ecosystems. That helps to address the 3 planetary challenges, what we call the nature and biodiversity loss, climate action, and pollution action. So everything is integrated. And again, in my capacity, because in addition to this coordination role, I'm also the global coordinator for COVID-19 humanitarian and medical. So how we are really restoring the health services, how we are restoring the waste management from the healthcare. And then I'm also representing UNEP on the UNCT, UN country team Pakistan from UNEP. So again, our UNCT, we are working on the Sustainable Development Country Framework, where again, we are focusing on the basin restoration. So it's again coming with all the aspects, whether you talk about industries, you talk about the agriculture, you talk about the mining, you talk about the fishing, you talk about the irrigation, water, and you're talking about the transport, whether it be the land transport or marine transport and so on. So again, my whole point is that we should focus in holistic manner. When we talk about the ecosystem restoration, we just may not like go just a mangroves restoration as a stand alone, but how the mangroves can help for the shrimp, for the fishing, for the even the siltation and so on, how the mangroves can even help not to encroach the sea to the land. Suppose in Badin and so on, there's a lot of encroachment of the sea. Same goes with the highlands, that how the restoration of the forest on the one hand can create a lot of food and other resources for the people, but more important, they can help to avoid the landslides. They can help to bring the water unpolluted to the rivers and so on. So basically, as the SDPI has been working very, very hard over the years, and I really congratulate everyone, and especially Dr. Abid Suleri, and more important, my previous boss, Ambassador Shafqat, that who was the Deputy Executive Director in UNEP. So I really look forward to this session, but more important, how we go to the 2030. So if we take some resolutions with decisions, some monitoring system by the SDPI to see what we can achieve by 2030, it will be a big success. So on that note, again, thank you very much. And thank you, Dr. Shafqat Munir. Back to you.
Thank you, Dr. Memon Saab. I think you have elaborated a lot of things, clubbing all these sectors together, because every human action that actually damaging or using ecosystem. And if it is not repaired, then continuously we will be having the problem now we are having. At Glasgow, there has been a debate that how can we contain 1.5 degree when the scenarios are building up more than 2.7 degrees. This is actually the nature-based solution and the ecosystem restoration that may help humanity to survive. That's why this is important. And Dr. Memon has raised a lot of connectivities together, how we can work on different sectors, making all sectors together in one stream to look at ecosystem restoration. Thank you once again, Dr. Memon. And now, first, I would like to thank the World Food Program, Pakistan office and international office for supporting us for organizing this session. And we have two eminent speakers from World Food Program as well. Let me first request Adam Savelli for his remarks, and then we will go to other speakers. Over to you, Adam. Are you there?
Yes, I am. Are you able to hear me all right?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, great. Now I will try to share my screen. I am unable to, it says that host disabled participant screen sharing. Do you know how I can get my presentation up?
Screen sharing option.
Yeah.
One moment, please, Mr. Adam.
No problem.
Okay, you can share your screen, Mr. Adam.
Great. Okay. Are you able to see the screen now?
Yes, show the screen.
Great. Okay, then I will kick off. Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thank you to SDPI for hosting this important event. Of course, to all the participants for attending, and to all the other panelists today for what I'm sure will be very interesting and important presentations. I'm Adam Savelli. I am a climate risk specialist with the Alliance of Biodiversity and CIAT, better known as the Alliance, which is part of the CGIAR. I'm based in Hanoi, in Vietnam, and Iftikhar Abbas from the World Food Program is in Islamabad today, I believe maybe at the presentation, I'm sorry, at the conference in person. Just to introduce the research, the World Food Program's Climate and Disaster Risk Reduction Unit, in collaboration with their Research, Assessment, and Monitoring Unit, engaged CGIAR to identify means of preemptively supporting the climate resilience of vulnerable communities in 9 high-risk geographies around the world. This analysis included a mixed methods research plan with desk review, climate change modeling, impact model assessments, stakeholder workshops, and key informant interviews. Today, I will present a summary of the analytical outputs and the recommendations that were made for Pakistan. So to begin with, we performed climate forecasting and economic modeling at the national level in Pakistan to understand how climate change is likely to impact agricultural production and food security through 2050. So here are these results at the national level. All the modeled results in this presentation are based using were produced using a combination of RCP 8.5 and SSP5 scenarios. Overall, this combination envisions a bleak climate change outlook, unfortunately, where warming is exacerbated by increased fossil fuel use. However, some of the worst impacts in terms of food availability are partly offset by an optimistic forecast of enhanced technology and education levels. So while the socioeconomic development is in line with recent trends in Pakistan, the projections deal with a projected mean global temperature increase of between 1.4 and 2.6 degrees Celsius by 2050 over 2005 levels. Now, if you look at the images on the screen, the set of lines at the top of the graph indicate temperatures, and the bars at the bottom indicate precipitation. This data, again, is at the national level, so significant local variations will exist in a country as large and geographically diverse as Pakistan. But the key here is really to read the chart in combination with the key growing seasons, Kharif and Rabi, which are indicated under the main graph. We know that Kharif, the main growing season, is usually the rainy season, but this is erratic as many areas in Pakistan are very dry, meaning a lot of agricultural production depends on groundwater. It's drawn from the Indus Basin and various irrigation networks. But generally, both seasons are quite dry throughout the country. Less than 100 millimeters of rainfall is generally considered to be a dry month. And as you can see here, no month receives more than 30 millimeters of rain historically, currently, or into the future. Also what you'll see here is sort of that the growing seasons, the precipitation patterns shift, where the beginning of the growing season is likely to begin to get wetter. The growing season will dry out toward the middle and get wetter again toward the end of the season. This is concerning as well because increased precipitation toward the end of the growing season can make harvesting more difficult and lead to agricultural losses. And you'll also see that as time goes on, both the maximum and the minimum temperatures increase by a few degrees during all months. Precipitation increases are also expected throughout all months of the year, but the precipitation gains are not expected to match the increases in temperature, which indicates increased likelihood of drought in coming decades. Now, the following analyses that I will present use the impact model, which is an economic model which explores interlinkages between future scenarios, I should say, related to climate change, socioeconomic development, agricultural suitability, and also trading patterns. So these projections combine biophysical suitability of key crops with pricing signals, comparative advantages, and modeled agricultural yields to produce results at the national level. Impact generally predicts increasing production, most likely due to growing populations. Population in Pakistan is, of course, growing very rapidly, and ongoing technological improvements. And again, these results are at the national level, so they're not disaggregated between smallholder farmers and large commercial farming operations, different economic groups, men and women, or livelihood zones, for example. So this slide shows the projected impact that climate change is likely to have on production quantity and yields for key agricultural commodities. In the center here, you see the percentage change over time for harvested areas, production quantities, and average yields. Pink indicates a negative trend, so you can see that most of the key crops here are modeled negatively, and blue would indicate a positive trend. You can see this for a little bit, very faintly, for wheat. On the right, production yield and areas harvested are expressed as percentages of their respective 2020 levels. Now, I'd like to stress that you'll see that this is the difference between a climate change and a no climate change scenario. So although overall production is projected to increase for almost all key crops by 2050, that's for wheat, vegetables, sugarcane, cotton, beef, small, etc. The production of all of these key commodities is projected to be significantly lower under conditions of climate change than under conditions where climate change did not exist. So again, just to stress, overall production is likely to increase, but the agricultural sector in Pakistan will be limited. It will not be able to reach its full capacity due to the negative impacts of climate change. You see that climate change is most likely to impact maize and other cereals most negatively, whereas wheat and cotton seem comparatively resilient. So here we have this is again a result from the impact model. And here we have the percentage of population at risk of hunger and the number of undernourished children. Both these numbers are also projected to decline overall in the coming decades, mostly as a result of increasing per capita calorie availability, which is commonly used as a proxy indicator for caloric consumption. Now, again, I'd like to caution, while this presents an optimistic picture for food and nutritional security through 2050, these indicators are projected at the national level. What this means is that overall gains may not be distributed evenly. So while current vulnerability is generally a predictor of future vulnerability, and with climate change, climate variability and climate hazards are forecasted to negatively impact agricultural production, as I showed in the last slide, alongside livelihood generation and general human security throughout Pakistan over coming decades. So what is quite likely is that vulnerability will become entrenched in certain geographic areas. So while at the national level, indicators increase and move in a positive direction in terms of production and food security in areas that are already suffering from various socioeconomic and climatic vulnerability, these vulnerabilities will likely become increased. This means that purposive policy and programming interventions are needed to equally distribute socioeconomic benefits that are experienced at the national level to these at-risk geographies that are less likely to experience the benefits. That brings us into our livelihood zone level analysis. So as I said, the research was concentrated at the national level, but the World Food Program country office in Pakistan also indicated 5 livelihood zones based on their vulnerability to overlapping environmental hazards and food insecurity. And they're indicated here on the screen. So the first livelihood zone is the irrigated plains in Southeast Sindh. This is Badun and Niprakhas. The second is the sandy deserts in Southeast Sindh, so Umakhat and Topakar. The third livelihood zone is the dry mountains in Northwest Balochistan, Pishin and Kila Abdullah. Livelihood zone 4 is quite large, and it encompasses the dry western plateau in Southwest Balochistan. That's Awaran, Shagai, Gwadar, Kesh, Haran, Lazbala, Panjgur, and Washuk. And the fifth livelihood zone is the dry mountains in northwestern Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, with the districts of Bajor, Chitral, Lower Dir, Upper Dir, Khyber, Khurram, Mohmand, Orakzai, Swat, North Waziristan, and South Waziristan. And I apologize if my pronunciation was wrong on any of those districts. So here, this slide shows the difference in annual mean temperature for the Kharif season on the left and the Rabi season on the right. Historically, for the maps on the left, through 2040 in the middle and through 2060 on the right. You can see here that significant temperature increases are expected across all 5 livelihood zones, generally with greater increases during Kharif than Rabi, because Kharif is seasonally the warmer season. All livelihood zones are and will grow even hotter through 2050. This is especially concerning in the glacial areas of northern Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province, as increasing temperatures, especially during the Rabi season, may impact glacial melt. This can cause GLOFs, glacial lake outburst flooding locally, and downriver flooding all the way through the Indus Basin, which can be extremely damaging to agricultural production and agricultural livelihood generation. Moving forward, this is same slide, Kharif on the left, Rabi on the right. Instead of temperature, this is indicating differences in annual total rainfall by 2050. You can see that although slight increases are projected in Sindh and Balochistan, both areas are projected to remain very, very dry in the coming decades. However, erratic rainfall is becoming more of an issue in the livelihood zone 1 district of Badin and Miprakhas and livelihood zone 2 districts in Topakar and Umakhat, because these are areas that are not used to, particularly the sandy deserts, receiving much rainfall. This can drive flash flooding and also drive locust infestations locally. It's unfortunate because these results showed up in the modeling and seemed out of step with historical climate conditions in these areas, but we sense checked these with members of the Sindh PDMA, and they said that these erratic rainfalls in the desert are happening and are projected to continue. It is not enough, unfortunately, to sustain increased agricultural production, but like I said, can drive locust infestation and blast floods. You'll also see increased precipitation projected for northern parts of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. Increased precipitation alongside increased temperatures is likely to even further exacerbate the risks of glacial melt, localized GLOFs, and downriver flooding throughout the Indus River Basin. Here we have the projected future incidence of drought on the top and heat stress on the bottom on a monthly basis in the future. And you'll see we have red lines here. These red lines indicate very severe conditions that are critical to people, crops, and livestock. Conditions exceeding this threshold indicates extremely severe environment that is quite difficult to produce food in. The x-axis indicates the months of the year, 1 through 12, and the y-axis, the number of days per month likely to experience a hazard. So for the top, you'll see that with the exception of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa in the early months of the year, all livelihood zones are likely to be experiencing critical drought conditions. Heat stress on the bottom is concentrated in the sandy deserts in southeastern Sindh and the irrigated plains in southeast Sindh and the dry plateau in southwestern Balochistan. Generally, seasonal trends are likely to continue through to 2050. Higher altitudes in the Baloch Mountains and in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa are less impacted by heat stress, but you'll see that in the summer months, we still exceed this critical threshold, and this is likely to increase in severity through 2050. It's important to note also that heat stress generally measures is a livestock measure, but many livestock rely on crop production for feed. So as a proxy indicator, it's likely to impact livestock in this way as well by impacting the availability of feed crops like seeds and millet. Moving forward, this slide is similar to the last, so I won't explain the format of it, but you'll see on the top we have dry spells. Dry spell is another indicator of drought, which is less severe, which is why you see here in these first couple of months of the year, Khyber Pakhtunkhwa is likely to experience dry spell. They're less severe overall, but they're still harmful to humans, crops, and animals. Flooding risk on the bottom, you'll see is less severe than the other hazards across the livelihood zones. It seems to remain within tolerable limits across most of them, and mostly follow predicted monthly rainfall patterns. The most exposed are the dry mountains in northern Khyber Pakhtunkhwa and Sindh's sandy deserts. And again, I know that you need to be sensitive when forecasting flood in sandy desert areas, but the modeling results are likely indicating the impact of erratic rainfall, which again, we sense check. In Takwakar and Umarkot, which are extremely dry, they will likely face occasional risk scattered due to high intensity rainfall through July and September. And this aligns with the previous climate modeling. And then finally, with final projections I will present, we have the occurrence of drought in blue and heat stress in red, as well as their co-occurrence sort of in this purple color during the Kharif season on top and Rabi on the bottom. During Kharif, most of the livelihood zones are already experiencing drought, and for much of Balochistan and southeastern Sindh, heat stress as well. The co-occurrence of heat stress and drought is projected to expand across much of Balochistan, including Washuk, northwestern and southeastern Shagai and Haran. Heat stress is also projected to increase in Kila Abdullah and some districts in KP, including south and north Waziristan, Khyber, and Memon. Drought is projected to increase across northern lower Chitral and southern upper Chitral. And given the cooler temperatures during the Rabi season, heat stress is less pronounced generally throughout the Rabi season, but is still an issue, particularly in the southern areas. During Rabi season, drought and heat stress expand to cover much of southern Balochistan, as you'll see here. And by 2050, experiences the co-occurrence of both of these hazards. So based on the climate projections, a series of recommendations have been formulated for policymakers and stakeholders operating in the humanitarian development nexus across all the livelihood zones. These recommendations focus on building the resilience of vulnerable communities, food insecurity, sort of in line with the recommendations, with the projections, that were just presented. So the first is that provincial and sub-provincial administrations should be supported in implementing provincial climate change policies through partnerships with humanitarian development organizations. So while at the national level, climate change, food security, DRR, agricultural development policies are very, very well developed and robust, what we see is that these often go unimplemented or insufficiently implemented at the provincial, and then of course also at the district, at the union council and the tehsil level. Particularly in Sindh and Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, there are very robust provincial policies in place. with early warning systems, DRR assessment and compensation mechanisms, support for livelihood diversification, last mile climate information and advisory services. These are all priority action areas, but the provincial administrations tend to require assistance, both in terms of funding and technical assistance to implement them. And so greater support there is necessary to sort of for the impact of these policies to be felt by the communities that they are trying to benefit. Number two is that Pakistan's social protection scheme should be expanded to cover climate vulnerable households. So what you see in Pakistan is some of the strongest social protection systems in the world. ISPA, ASAS, these truly are world leading in terms of their reach and their ability to assist vulnerable populations, but often households that are vulnerable to climate hazards fall through the cracks. So we recommend developing climate vulnerability networks so that in the event of a climate hazard, at the very least, you can very quickly distribute humanitarian aid in the aftermath. But what we're seeing and what the World Food Program is really leading on is the field of anticipatory action, where forward-looking indicators are put in place and relief is actually dispersed to vulnerable households before the full impact of a hazard is felt. This is not only cost-effective for those who are implementing it, but generally results in drastically increased outcomes for vulnerable households. So this is a key policy point going forward. Third recommendation is these anticipatory actions that I was sort of just discussing. What we really need to begin implementing these on the ground are enhanced remote sensing and early warning systems. These are in place in some areas, but not in all. In many places, what would need to be done at the provincial level is a capacity gap analysis to identify where existing systems may need to be upgraded or new infrastructure installed to enable these anticipatory safety nets. Yes, and then moving on to number 4. What we've seen here is that community assets can be very useful in boosting the resilience of climate vulnerable households. So what we mean by this is where drought and heat stress are likely to grow more intense and widespread, so across all livelihood zones. Water storage facilities, livestock shelters can be built in flood-prone areas. We're talking about embankments, dikes, protected funds, and livestock shelters. Other assets that promote market connectivity, such as post-harvest storaging and processing infrastructure, transportation means are useful. And all of these can be made more cost-effective and impactful through private sector partnerships. Community-based participatory planning should be employed to safeguard agricultural livelihoods where possible. It's very important to have climate vulnerable households dictating the priorities in terms of the policy and programming interventions that are implemented to assist them. And so forums, community-based planning forums can be implemented and used to educate communities on the climate risks they are facing, but also can be used to source indigenous knowledge and sort of harness the resilience that communities have been exhibiting for a long time. And then finally, all of these need to be enabled through sustainable finance, both at the project level for implementing partners. And what that means is 5, 7, 10-year funding windows. Climate change is a long-term issue and it requires long, sustained programming to meet its challenges. And so programs that are only funded for a year will necessarily fail to achieve their aims. But also at the household level, sustainable finance can't only be flowing to humanitarian development organizations. We need to find a way to put the money in the people's pockets so that they can be empowered to make their own decisions at the household level rapidly. And that concludes the presentation. I believe we have time for questions. I'm not sure if the questions will happen now or if they will happen at once all the panelists have spoken, sort of as a group discussion. So I will leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you, Adam. I think Adam's presentation is technical and it gives us some scenarios starting from 2021 to scenario to 2040, then 50 and 60. And he has given us a different scenario if climate change or the heat stress hits us, how would be the situation of drought, how would be the situation of flooding, and how our crops could be impacted by that. And I will not go into detail of the scenario building approaches, but certainly I would look at some of the recommendations he has given us. These are really important in Pakistan context because his whole presentation was focused on Pakistan, looking at Rabi and Kharif fasal crops in Pakistan. So in the recommendation, he has talked about how provincial level government or sub-provincial level government needs to connect with humanitarian development organization. Lately, during the last few years, it has happened that since we have not seen any big emergency urgently, and there is a breakdown between the relationship or the connectivity between the humanitarian organization and the sub-provincial level and provincial level organization. I think in this context, this is very important. Then he talked about finance. Then he talked about the climate, the supporting climate vulnerable household through the social net program. So far, Pakistan social net program, they are covering the population, especially the women, in the context of COVID and other social protection scenarios. But this is very important and important in the sense that climate change is hitting us, is hitting our population and communities, and these communities really need to be protected against these social protection, through these social protection policies. And one most important thing which we have been raising at Glasgow as well was the loss and damage thing. Because in the climate change, we have seen that loss of damage, which is hugely hitting the population and communities. But this has been previously, this is partly covered under the climate migration part. So at Glasgow, the demand from our side, from the civil society side, particularly from South Asia, has been that the loss and damage should be taken up, and there should be special finances for loss and damage. Similar on the pattern of the the climate fund and adaptation fund, there should be a special fund on loss and damage, and that particularly Adam has mentioned the scenarios if agriculture will be hit because of the climate change, then these losses damages would be adding up, and that in that sense this is important. Then the other recommendation also important, but time is running short. So thank you, Adam, once again, and I would like to request Iftikhar Sahab if you want to add some points to Adam's presentation, because he is also a co-presenter with him. Over to you, Iftikhar Sahab.
Thank you very much. Although I haven't a separate presentation because this was a joint work done by Adam and myself, but let me clear a few points that are presented in this presentation. Number one, this study specifically have focused on 5 agroecological zones, mainly the dry mountains of Balochistan and Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, as well as the irrigated and desert lands of Sindh. And this was intentionally selected, this area was intentionally selected for this study, mainly because of the past trends. If we look at the past few years, then the climate is has adversely hit these areas. For example, if we look at the 2017, 18, 19 droughts that were prevailing in some areas of Sindh and Balochistan, but at the same time, when the drought was at peak, we observed that in early 2020, these areas of Sindh and Balochistan were experiencing the flood and snow emergencies. So this is the one fantastic example of the climate change, that how this climate change is impacting our lives and livelihoods. So that on one hand, there was a peak drought, and then at the same time, when the humanitarian partners and government were planning for the drought response, at the same time, after 1 month, we were experiencing the snow and flood emergencies in areas. So I think that we need to seriously consider this climate change variables, specifically in these areas where the communities are already suffering because of the structural issues in our systems. They are already living, most of the community in these areas are already living below the poverty line. And when they experience these additional shocks, they are not able to sustain their lives and livelihood. So this is one point. And second point that I would like to clarify is that here in this study, we have taken the agroecological zones as proxy to livelihood zone because the livelihood zones are not existent in Pakistan, and it's only agroecological zones that were established by Pakistan Agriculture Research Council in 1980. We consider those agroecological zones as proxy to livelihood zone, although I understand that over the past 40 years since these agroecological zones were established, the climate change has severely changed the on-ground situation. And now if we revise this agroecological zone, that maybe we have a different agroecological zones as compared to this one. So we also need to look into this, that how we can revise this agroecological zones, or we can establish the livelihood zones for better decision making and programming. Over.
Thank you, Iftikhar sir, for adding valuable points to Adam's presentation. And I hope the colleagues from World Food Program would be staying with us because there might be some questions. So thank you both of you for presentation. Now I would move to the other part of the session on some of the specialized presentations on ecosystem restoration. So starting from the house here in presence, I would request Mr. Salman Danish to present his policy papers, key points on marine ecosystem of Pakistan. Over to you, Salman.
Thank you, Dr. Shafqat. So, do we have the presentation up? All right, so my presentation is on marine ecosystem restoration, which includes mangroves and tidal marshes and other blue economy ventures. So as an introduction, I'm sure most of you are familiar that Pakistan has a almost 1,000-kilometer long coastline, which connects the two provinces, the Balochistan and Sindh provinces. And we also have the 7th largest arid mangrove ecosystem in the Indus Delta. And our marine ecosystem is connected to livelihoods of millions of people, provide food, oxygen, biodiversity, everything from shrimp to fish to all kinds of sea products. And our ports, Karachi and Gwadar ports, they also have the potential to become global level ports. And here we will examine the marine ecosystem diversity, carbon, blue carbon specifically, and its linkages to the economy. And next slide, please. So mangroves in Pakistan, they occupy an area of 1,464 square kilometers as per 2020 data. And mangrove forests and tidal marshes, they are estimated to store 21 million tons of organic carbon, or 76 million tons of carbon dioxide equivalent. And this is not a small number. So normally it's said that trees are the lungs of the environment, but it should also be noted that the blue economy, the blue resources, they are also major carbon sinks and producers of oxygen. And these numbers, they give encouragement for the plantation of mangroves. And the Sindh Forest Department has already been working on this. They have successfully increased the number and the area of cultivation of mangrove forests. Apart from that, Pakistan has also recently done a rapid assessment of the blue carbon profile to World Bank so that we can take appropriate actions and modify our NDCs. NDCs are our nationally determined contributions. And this revision will help us increase commitments through blue carbon or marine ecosystems, and devise NDC carbon reduction commitments through carbon sequestration and adaptation measures. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. All right. So next we have to speak a bit about the threats to our marine ecosystems. So one huge threat is the overexploitation of any resource, and same is the case with the marine ecosystems. And our the problem is that our marine resources have been so overexploited for short-term gain, and this will lead to degradation of our mangroves and our other resources, and that's just not viable in the long term. And the main issues are overconsumption, waste dumping, carelessness towards our resources, especially plastic pollution. I'm sure we're all aware of plastic pollution problems, single-use plastics. And this also includes toxic waste dumping from the companies and the manufacturers. That's a major issue. And on top of everything, climate change itself, like we've been discussing in this panel already, climate change itself is a huge threat to the ecosystems, and the same goes for marine ecosystems. And the main problem is ocean acidification and the warming of the seas themselves. And these can lead to coral reefs dying off and other marine systems such as mangroves being majorly affected. So I've mentioned mangroves a couple of times here. So let's get into what actually are mangroves. Next slide, please. Okay, so mangroves, basically mangroves are trees or large shrubs that grow in the intertidal zone in tropical and subtropical regions with special adaptations to survive in the salty seawater. And the key characteristic for a plant to be considered a mangrove is its ability to survive saline environments. And this has developed in several different families of plants. They can be small trees, they can be large shrubs, they can be any kind of plant. And the term mangrove is usually applied to both individual plants and plant ecosystems. So sometimes these mangroves are in clusters, different plants performing different functions, but together they're called a mangrove. So these mangroves, they also act as nurseries for fish. Fish can lay eggs there. We have turtles there. We have a lot of biodiversity in these mangroves. But the problem is our pollution, our toxic discharges from sewage and chemical water, they're polluting and harming these environments. And these are also excellent nurseries for shrimp and other shellfish. At a global level, there is a broad recognition that the marine and coastal areas face unprecedented human-induced threats from industries such as fishing, transportation, and the waste disposal, specifically waste and toxic chemical disposal. These need to be addressed before we can take advantage, proper sustainable advantage of these ecosystems. Next slide, please. So now some of the actions that need to be taken for marine ecosystem restoration. So Pakistan is committed to fulfill its obligation related to protection of national environment. We already have established marine protected areas, and Pakistan also plans to declare 10% of its marine and coastal areas under protected areas coverage, which will increase our total protected area further. And further meetings have been held with stakeholders, and 3 potential sites have been identified. Rasmalan, provincial jurisdiction of Balochistan, this comes under Balochistan, and off Pasni, and the rocky headland located at Malan, Pasni, or Mara as marine protected areas. So these areas, they have a lot of biodiversity. Turtles come here to lay eggs, fish diversity, fish stocks are plentiful here, but they need to be protected lest we lose this valuable resource. And then Gawada is already declared a marine protected area, especially known for the presence of its cetacean species. Cetaceans include dolphins and whales. Arabian humpback whales, blue whales, bright whales, they're regularly sighted in these regions. And there are two other sites, Omara Turtle Beach and Astola Island, which some of you might have heard of already, the second one specifically. And these are very valuable resources in terms of biodiversity and resources. Next slide, please. Okay, so let's speak a bit about the value of these ecosystems. So creek areas in Sindh, in continuation to my last point, they have great value to marine ecosystem with its duly recognized ecological and biological importance and variety of habitats. The Indus River discharges in the sea through the creek areas in Sindh. Another important fact is that these have mud flats. So mud flats are another important blue economy resource. And mangroves, again mangroves, they are home to a variety of marine birds, breeding and nesting grounds for several species of marine fish and invertebrates. This also includes turtles, which are not mentioned in the slide though. Parts of the Indus River mangroves are known to be the largest arid area mangrove forest of the world. This area has significance for migratory species of fish. The Indus estuarine area has diversified bird fauna, including cranes, flamingos, pelicans, waders, scoots, ducks, gulls, and terns. So we have a lot of biodiversity in terms of birds as well. And now I think for the economy people, the greatest value for mangroves is their role as carbon sinks. So carbon trading and carbon credits are a thing. So they can act as carbon sinks as well. They can sequester huge amounts of carbon and play an important role in carbon credits, carbon budgets, and are good for tackling the climate change issue. They are also considered among the key blue carbon habitats, the other two being tidal marshes and seagrass meadows. Among the most carbon-rich forests in the tropics. It is estimated that mangroves are able to sequester 6 to 8 tons of carbon dioxide per hectare per year. And surprisingly, this exceeds the tropical forest by about 2 to 4 times the rate of sequestration. So this needs to be kept in mind that this is a very valuable resource and we need to be very careful and very responsible with its usage. Next slide, please. So these are some facts and figures that should be mentioned. According to Red Plus Readiness study, sampling was conducted on 79 sample plots and limited to one pilot site in Sindh. This study estimated that carbon sequestration has been estimated in 9.10 tons of carbon dioxide equivalent per hectare per year in biomass and 7.68 tons of carbon dioxide per hectare per year in soils. However, the soil thing needs to be further investigated because it showed higher than expected value for the region and the type of sediment. So let's take that with a grain of salt. As part of the marine ecosystem restoration initiatives and to benefit from REDD+ payment mechanisms, Pakistan also plans to declare more areas at marine protected system, as I've already said. But this will be done through consultations with custodian communities, provincial governments, and other interest groups, as leadership in Pakistan believes that until we prioritize marine and coastal ecosystem, we cannot make our development truly sustainable. And next, we'll talk about some obligations and international agreements. So Pakistan is a signatory to various conventions and treaties for the protection of environment and biodiversity, including marine and coastal biodiversity. I think you can see a list of these. Paris Agreement, most important from the previous years. Now we have the Glasgow Pact, Convention on Trade of Endangered Species, Ramsar Convention, Kyoto Protocol, United Nations Conventions on Law of Sea, the Basel Convention, Stockholm Convention, and Sendai Framework on Disaster Risk Reduction. So coming closer to the national level, we have also established a Marine Pollution Control Board since 1994, a National Institute of Oceanology in 1981, and formulation of Pakistan's National Strategy and Action Plan sometime in the past as well. Due to Pakistan's commitment toward climate change, our country was interested to host the launch of the World Environment Day 2021. And this was piggybacked by the launch of the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration, as Dr. Shafqat has already mentioned. So we have a rich potential of marine ecosystem amid a variety of degradation threats and challenges. So it is necessary that the federal and provincial governments pay special attention to this issue and play their role in protecting the marine and coastal ecosystems. So one example is the 10 billion tree tsunami program. And this is a flagship of the ecosystem restoration programs. So perhaps something similar could be done in terms of coral reef restorations. And this has already been initiated in countries such as Mauritius. That's one I have been following recently. And what they do is they take tiny fragments of corals and they put them underwater in the sea, and they grow new corals. So this is also helping combat some threats to biodiversity. We have to control our emissions so we can mitigate ocean acidification and other threats related to this blue part of our world. So the marine ecosystems. All right. So can we just move on to the next slide, please? Yes, the policy recommendation. So the World Bank has made a few policy recommendations, and I'll be sharing something from those. There are two types of policy recommendations: research and outreach, and blue carbon economy implementations. So the research side, it advises to focus on improving the mapping and monitoring of blue carbon ecosystem through time. So we have to consider time scales as well. Work on updating national greenhouse gas inventory and prepare for accounting of nationally determined contributions. Identifying and evaluating key pressures on blue carbon marine systems in Pakistan. Investing in research to evaluate and map co-benefits provided by the blue carbon economy ecosystem. We also have to strengthen education, training, and engagement, because until and unless there's awareness and engagement with the public, we cannot move at a rapid pace. And then come the blue economy implementation side. So we have to review and improve institutional arrangements. We need to work on capacity building. We have to review and implement climate change adaptation options, review and implement climate mitigation options, as well as seek different sources and modalities of financial resource options. So these were some policy recommendations, and I think with that we're done. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Salman, for your presentation on marine ecosystem. And during the presentation, you have touched upon a couple of things. We have some more stuff on that. For example, blue economy, blue carbon economy, and he talked about, when he was talking about mangroves, he talked about the forest sector. So we have two more experts on that. First, I would request Dr. Sehrish Qayyum for her presentation on post-pandemic blue economy, a contribution towards ecosystem restoration 2030 and sustainable socio-economic development. Over to you, Dr. Sehrish.
Hello, Assalamu alaikum. Am I audible?
Yes, Sehrish.
All right, thank you so much. It's really a pleasure for me to join this STC and again the specific panel of ecosystem restoration. My deepest gratitude to Shafqat and SDPI for granting me this opportunity. I will try to be very precise while sharing the few facts and figures. Let me share. Can you please display my presentation? Hello.
Yes, sir.
Sir, my presentation is displayed or not?
It's displayed. Carry on.
All right. And this then move to the first slide. Today I'm presenting on a post-pandemic blue economy, a contribution towards ecosystem restoration 2030. And
Sehrish, I would request please be precise while telling history, because we have already short of time. So sorry because, so just take your time and just give us the glimpses and major things.
Sure,
Thank you very much.
All right. Before discussing anything, just go towards the definition of a blue economy, what actually the international studios and international forums say about. So the World Bank says that sustainable use of oceanic resources for economic growth, improved livelihoods, jobs, and ocean system health. So here the question rises is that what is the need of the time and aim of a blue economy? So what importantly I'm talking about is that what actually we need, that is to recreate a relationship with the planet. Kindly move to the next slide. So with this time, we are needing to recreate a relationship with the planet, and this like developing a relationship, there is an undeniable linkage between the blue economy and ecosystem restoration. The next slide, please. So this undeniable linkage is a sustainable use of ocean resources by maintaining the oceanic health, which will leading towards lessening the stress on terrestrial as well as in a marine ecosystem. Kindly move to the next slide. While pandemic stressed ecosystem by disturbing the supply chains, halting normal routines, raised unemployment, leading to the socioeconomic strains, was another side, and these both parallel sides may be joined in a way to maintain an ecosystem by a blue economy and by saving the environment from further damage, which has already been done. So kindly move to the next slide. Blue economy is a multi-dimensional as well as the economic activities under the realm are the sea dependent. Why I'm saying this? Because it includes tourism, marine transport, energy, and fishing sectors. So considering this type, kindly move to the next slide. So considering ecosystem health, it is very important to talk about nowadays that right after the COP26, there have been a more urgent need to revive the damaged ecosystem than now. So as UNGA Secretary stated in COP26, and he addressed that it is an important step, but is not enough, and we must accelerate climate action to keep alive the goal of limiting global temperature rise to 1.5 degrees. Kindly move to the next slide. So the ecosystem support of all life on Earth, because the healthier our ecosystem is, the healthier is the planet and its people. So the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration aims to prevent, halt, and reverse the degradation process of ecosystem, and on every continent and in every ocean. And it can help to end poverty, combat climate change, and prevent mass extinction. And it will not only succeed if everyone is not playing its part. So considering this, now connecting into the SDGs, according to the research, SDG 14, life below water, can be conserved via SDG 12, responsible consumption and production of all kinds of resources. Either those are the marine resources or they can land-based resources. So moving towards a situation like restriction to reduce the human interaction have helped to avoid a greater suffering and a death from the COVID-19. Kindly move to the next slide. So during the COVID-19 pandemic, we have also created a socioeconomic hardship. Like this was a disruption is unprecedented in the modern era for global observing networks, pervasive sensing, and a large-scale tracking of human mobility and behavior, and creating a unique test bed of understanding the Earth system. In this perspective, we hypothesize the initiation of long-term Earth system responses to the COVID-19 pandemic to along in two multidisciplinary cascades like energy emission, climate, air quality, poverty, globalization, food, and biodiversity. While looking into the short-term view, we see that impacts are dominated by the direct effects arising from the reduced human activity, longer-lasting impacts on the likely result from cascading effects of economic recession, global poverty, green investment, and human behavior. Why these? Because these impacts offer the opportunity for the novel insights, particularly with the careful deployment of targeted data collection, coordinated model experiments, and solution-oriented randomized control trials enduring after the pandemic. Here we have a few very precise way forwards, like I'm not going into the detail, that is all embedded into my detailed research paper. Kindly move towards the way forwards. Healthy ecosystem, next one, please. Healthy ecosystem regulate water and carbon as a maximum life on Earth needs carbon, as a tree stores the carbon, so does oil, and sea grasses in the ocean, and even human body is 18% carbon. But as an ecosystem become weak, they release the carbon instead of storing it. So healthy soil grows 90% of our food, but pollution, climate change, pesticides are making the soil less productive. So while the yield go down, we turn and change the land into the wild places into the farmlands and polluting the healthy soil, and we lose the forest. Wildlife is forced to come close to the human brink. Like, it is very important thing to understand that when we are deforesting, the wildlife is coming towards the human life, and there the diseases have been transferred. That is called zoonotic diseases. Like the viruses have been passed between the animals and the humans, like the bird flu, Ebola, and this COVID-19 pandemic, which we are facing from the last 2 years. So, but there are some actions we can take towards growing the, trees in the cities. We're going to how to cut out the pollution dramatically. They could filter and cool the air, improving our health and reducing the global warming. But the trees can do more. Look at the mangroves, for instance. We are spending the multiple $1 billion, and they protect our coastline from the storms and floods. Building economies in nature will create jobs for the future, jobs that you can have, and although the restoring ecosystem will not only simple, it's not that easy, but together we can do that. Can you move to the next slide, please? And I believe in one thing, that land divides, but sea connects. It is a slogan that emphasizes the prerequisites of the maritime management and security. Life below water needs to be conserved for a sustainable blue economy, and a post-COVID world demands even a more inclusive approach of promoting such a vision. Like entrepreneurs, thinkers, leaders have to be involved in our family, schools, and workplace. Everyone has to do its parts and had to find a way out. Here, one thing has to be very bluntly mentioned, that sea resources are at risk due to illegal and overfishing, marine pollutants, and sea-based mining, which needs to shift to conserve and restore the marine ecosystem. Can you please move to the next slide? Here I'm sharing a very important fact that Pakistan Navy and or CGS, like the China Geological Survey, had a MOU in 2013. And on the first expedition, they reported that Pakistan nautical miles reports that a good chunk of marine resources, including fish, hydrocarbons, and many attached potentials are there. And according to the first expedition results, via Bahir Masa, that was a collaboration of Pakistan Navy with the CGS, and they highlighted that reservoirs of about 22,590 million tons oil equivalent are present in Pakistani nautical miles. We have to find it, we have to conserve these resources, and we have to utilize it very properly and very productively. So here I'm just giving an overview of the few possible options, right, to take a solution towards a socioeconomic development and a sustainable oceanic health. Kindly move towards the next slide. This is the image that is highlighting the area covered in the first CGS expedition in 2018. This is the region moving from Gawada to Ormara, that is near the beach of Karachi, and extended towards the exclusive economic zone in the continental shelf of Pakistan. And trust me, it is a biggest source of revenue generation, and it can be a second largest province of Pakistan if these resources are properly being used. Kindly move towards the next slide. So the two very precise options which I'm giving as a way forward are the aquaculture. One is aquaculture. Aquaculture is a recent activity in Pakistan, and it still is in infancy, because nevertheless there is an immense potential for development of the sector, despite its a vast fresh and a brackish and a marine water resources, but only the carp culture is practiced in inland waters and only a limited scale. So the carp are cultured in an urban ponds, like I have shown you in the picture here, using mostly extensive farming practices with a little input. So in Pakistan, fish fauna is rich. Like I can quote that only the 7 warm water species and the 2 cold water species are cultivated on a commercial level. So the trials experimented with the shrimp culture have been carried out in the Indus Delta region, and it has not succeeded because due to the non-availability of a hatchery-produced seeds. So what important is that we already have established industries. We have to improve the capacity building of those industries. We have to invest and modernize those procedures so that we can have a better production rate. Then I come towards the fisheries sector. Kindly move towards the next slide. Fisheries sectors as a whole contributes about to the 1% of country's GDP and provide jobs about the 1% of the country's labor force, which is very less. And it can be increased to tenfold, according to the CTS report. So the freshwater carp farming is the major aquaculture activity in the 3 of the country's 4 provinces, that is the Punjab, Sindh, Northwest Frontier Province, which is now the Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. So the northern mountains of Pakistan have a good potential of a trout culture, but production in these colder regions is still very small, again, due to the low technological advancements and availability of equipments. Then coming towards the last portion, that is the Pakistan's organization's role and responsibilities. This is the most important thing because organizations have been already putting efforts into these sectors. The one important is that aquaculture in Pakistan is basically a provincial responsibility. At the central level, fisheries is the responsibility of the Office of Fisheries Development, Commissioner FDC working under the Ministry of Food, Agriculture and Livestock, that is called MINPOL. So the Office of the FDC is responsible for policy, planning and coordination with the provincial fisheries department and other national international agencies. So what I am suggesting is to bring a cooperation, to bring a possible and a workable and a feasible option so that the both department can increase the collaboration so that whatever already has been invested, that must be enhanced, that production rate has to be enhanced rather than establishing an entirely a new ministry, an entirely a new department. So please put your effort in already established organizations, already established departments, like Pakistani Agricultural Research Council, PARC, is the country's largest research organization and is responsible to MINPOL for adding in information and all other supporting in, regarding different projects. And some universities in the countries are involved in the basic fisheries. So what important is we have to work together. We have to make an effort together to have a positive and a concrete results. That was all from my side. And thank you so much for the cooperation. Any question is welcome.
Thank you, Dr. Sehrish Qayyum, for your presentation. You have rightly mentioned that health is somehow linked to the ecosystem, which is marine ecosystem. I'm not, discussing your paper here, my presentation or more, because sure, paucity of time, we have to move forward. We have the last speaker with us, Dr. Babar Shahbaz from the University of Agriculture, Faisalabad. Over to you, Dr. Sahab.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dr. Shafqat, for organizing such an important event webinar, and it is always a pleasure to be part of this SDPI Sustainable Development Conference. So, can you share my screen or my presentation on the screen?
Yes, it is appeared here. Carry on.
Okay, so due to shortage of time, I will restrict my presentation in 10 minutes. Basically, it is a review-based presentation. I will be presenting some facts and figures of terrestrial ecosystem. My main presentation is about restoration of terrestrial ecosystem of Pakistan. And then I will be talking about degradation of terrestrial ecosystem. And then I will be giving a brief overview of recent initiatives for restoration of terrestrial ecosystem, and then a quick analysis and the way in the form of the ways forward. Next slide, please. So ecosystem are very important for the food security, for the all components of food security, and terrestrial ecosystem in particular, they have the most important role in ensuring the food security by supporting agricultural production through essential natural resource base like soil, rangeland, watershed, and degradation of ecosystem along with poor ecosystem governance, it limits the ability of farmer to produce food, and consequently, it leads to the food insecurity. Next, please. So you can see here that ecosystem, they contribute to every component, every pillar of the food security, from the utilization, availability, access, and stability, all components. Next, please. So Pakistan has about 79.6 million hectares of total land, and only 28% of that area is under cultivation, which is roughly 22 million hectares. And 50% of Pakistan land is the rangeland, and only 5% of the total land area is under the some sort of forest cover, and rest of the land is barren land, scrubs, and alpine pasture, water body, human settlement, and other orchard and subalpine forest. Next, please. So terrestrial ecosystem, 49% of land area is arid and 35% is semi-arid. So more than 85% of total land area of Pakistan is arid or semi-arid. And in some studies says that about 90% of land area of Pakistan is arid or semi-arid. So Pakistan is generally a dry country. Only 6% is subhumid zone. And as many as 100 field and horticultural crops are being grown in these ecologies, and which are very important source of food security for the people living in this country. Next slide, please. So, although Pakistan have a meager forest cover, but we have good protected areas. There are as many as 398 protected area which have been spread throughout the countries in all the 4 provinces and Gilgit-Baltistan. There are national parks, game reserves, wildlife sanctuaries, wetlands under Ramsar Convention and community reserves. Next, please. So rangeland and forest, 90% of the rangeland are located in the arid and semi-arid areas, and rest are in the high rainfall alpine pasture. And the studies indicate that 60% feed for the goat and sheep and 40% for the camel, while in some, this is from the FAO, while some other studies says that about 90% of the feed for the goat, sheep and camel, they comes from the rangelands. And if 95% of the forest of Pakistan is natural forest, 28% dry temperate, and there are some other different categories of forest. So there are quite diversified categories of forest, but the per capita forest is very low. It is 0.021 hectare as compared to the 1 hectare per person of the world average. Next, please. So degradation of ecosystem. So first we talk about the forest. 27,000 hectares of forest are being lost every year, which is the 1.6% deforestation rate. And in fact, in Asia, it is the second highest. And in the world, it is one of the among the top 10 deforestation rate in the world. And if we talk about the land degradation, 11 million hectares of land are affected by the water erosion. And 4.4 to 5 million hectares are affected by the wind erosion. So water erosion and wind erosion, these are the 2 main causes of the land degradation. And more than 5 million hectares are affected by the salinity and sodicity. So the huge proportion of land is being degraded due to either water erosion, soil erosion, wind erosion, or sodicity. And drought, flooding, soil nutrient degradation, these are also causing the water, land erosion, land degradation. And in fact, our soils are generally deficient in the nutrients. And the same nutrients which are deficient in soil, over most of the population is also deficient in that nutrients. For example, generally our soils are zinc deficient, and majority of Pakistan population is also zinc deficient. So it is the concept of one health. The soil health, the land health is directly affecting the human health. Next, please. So you can see in this graph that in Punjab, the wind erosion is major causing the land degradation, and in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, Balochistan and northern areas, the water erosion is the major culprit causing the land degradation. Next slide, please. So there are some initiatives by the government. So I will be talking about the recent initiatives. The most important is the 10 billion tree tsunami project, which was started in 1918. So most of us know about it. Is the continuation of the billion tree tsunami project in the Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province. And under this project, the target of 1 billion tree was achieved in the mid-2021, and the United Nations acknowledged Pakistan's success on ecosystem restoration and selected Pakistan as the host for World Environment Day. And then the Protected Area Initiative, it is the key component of 10 billion tree tsunami. In fact, 10 billion tree tsunami has various components, and Protected Area Initiative is the key component. It aims at developing 15 more protected area across countries, and about more than 7,000 square kilometer of land area is to be protected under this initiative. And the target is that to further increase the area by 15% by 2023. And also the increase in number of national parks, game reserve, and all these. Next slide, please. Another initiative is ecosystem restoration initiative. And in fact, it is there is a larger project called Pakistan Hydrometeorological and Ecosystem Restoration Project, which is $188 million project by the government of Pakistan, and ecosystem restoration is the key component. And the major focus is on the conservation of forest and biodiversity and restoration of about 30% of degraded forest, 6% of degraded rangelands, and 10% of degraded wetlands. And then we have sustainable forest management. In fact, the complete name of project is the Sustainable Forest Management to secure multiple benefits in Pakistan high conservation areas. So this is the project funded by the Global Environment Facilities and UNDP, and its main target is to manage the forest on sustainable way, particularly the coniferous, Himalayan, riverine, and scrub forest. And this project concentrate on about 150,000 hectares of forest landscape. And then RED Plus Pakistan, RED Plus is in the implementation stage in Pakistan. And in fact, in June 2020, the government has provided additional $4 million for implementation of RED Plus. Next, please. So what is the quick analysis? First, when we analyze these initiatives, the recent initiative, which was initiated during the last 5 to 6 years, we find the absence of participatory ecosystem governance. As Dr. Mushtaq Memon talked in his opening speech, that the ecosystem governance has to be holistic in nature. We cannot say that management of forest separately, or the management of marine resources, or management of governance of rangeland. It has to be holistic, it has to be participatory governance, and it has to be backed by the customary and statutory laws. Lot of conflicts has occurred when the forest management, the joint forest management initiative was undertaken in the late 90s and 2000. The main aspect behind that was the ignorance of customary and statutory laws. And then ecosystem supporting food security policies. There are trade-offs between ecosystem conservation and food production, but in our food security policies, the ecosystem restoration or ecosystem governance, it is generally absent, or it is generally not taken care of. And improving land management, as I said, that the health of soil, health of land directly affect the human health. So this is the concept of One Health. The health of livestock directly help the human health. So better soil health, better land management would leads to the better human health. And next, please. So sustainable timber harvesting, and lastly, as I said that in my previous slide, that 50% of our land consists of rangelands. And it is generally an ignored aspect. Rangeland management, rangeland governance, restoration of land, rangeland, it has been ignored in most of the policies. There are very small scale projects targeted towards the restoration of rangeland lands, but there is need to prioritize the rangeland management in national policies, establishment of an independent organization for rangeland management. Whenever we talk about the ecosystem restoration, directly we go to the forest restoration, forest conservation. That's fine, but Pakistan is generally a rangeland country. Over most of the land consists of ranges, pastures. So And this is an ignored area which I need a concentration from the policymaker. So it was a very quick overview of the facts and figure about terrestrial ecosystem of Pakistan and current state and some recent initiative by the government. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Babar Shahbaz, for providing us an overview of the terrestrial ecosystem and particularly its linkages with food security, because the debates are on then climate change and earlier Adam has talked about the heat stress relating things. They ultimately impact the food, and you very rightly has pointed out and given us the ideas how whether it's rangeland management system, or particularly you talked about ecosystem supportive food security policy. These are very pertinent and in Pakistan context very important. Thank you, Dr. Babar, for your input. Now I would request Dr. Abbas for his concluding remarks. Dr. Abbas is an expert on climate change, economy, and food security, especially which Adam and Dr. Babar Shahbaz has mentioned about, and he has been recently appointed by the Prime Minister. In addition to his role of Economic Advisory Council, he is the convener of a committee which looks at the National Agriculture Transformation Plan. Over to you, Dr.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen, depending wherever you are watching the live stream of this session. Thanks, Shafqat, thanks, esteemed panelists, for highlighting this very important issue of ecosystem restoration and ecosystem protection. One knows that the rat race of economic growth, since ecosystem restoration may lead us to a stage where future generations of humans may have to carry personal oxygen devices to breathe. Just like now we have had to adopt to face masks. If we don't mend our ways, then living on Earth and Mars or any other planet may be a similar experience one day. And this is the future that, of course, we don't want for our next generation. Overexploitation by 1.6 times of natural resources than the planet can replenish is embedded in economies and governance system. And the resulting degradation is undermining hard-won development gains and threatening the well-being of future generations. From oceans to forests to farmland, the world's ecosystem are being degraded. And this is what we tried highlighting in COP26 in Glasgow. Of course, a lot needs to be done, but the mere fact that today across all continents, this subject of ecosystem restoration is being discussed, I think it's a heartening time. And I thanks all the speakers and panelists for sharing their words of wisdom. The recommendations that comes Pakistan relevant recommendations would be shared with relevant ministry and relevant authorities for their consideration and for implementation. Over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Suleri. Now, ladies and gentlemen, and the distinguished panelists, we have the message from Honorable Minister for Climate Change, Ms. Zartaj. May I request you to say the message?
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Dear panelists and participants, Assalamu alaikum. It is a matter of pride for us that our green initiatives have changed the country's global branding, and today the world admires and acknowledges Pakistan as a champion of the cause of ecosystem restoration. Within the last few years, the country stood tall with its flagship ecosystem restoration, 10 billion tree tsunami program that really made a wonder with series of action aimed at restoring nature, protecting lives and livelihoods under the leadership of Prime Minister Imran Khan. We have the honor of planting the billionth tree, leading the 10 billion tree targets. Ladies and gentlemen, the United Nations General Assembly in its 6 March 2019 resolution decided to observe the Decade on Ecosystem Restoration 2021-2023. Only with a healthy ecosystem we can enhance people's livelihood, counteract climate change, and stop the collapse of biodiversity. The UNF data says that half of the world's GDP is dependent on nature. Looking at the current state of affairs, just imagine if ecosystem degradation continues, it may cost 10 trillion US dollar to global GDP by 2050. If we want to protect nature and environment over the next 10 years, we have to achieve the targets set under the UN Decade. The UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration ends at the same time the SDG will be completed in 2030. Imagine if we restore ecosystem within next 10 years, we would be in a position to achieve all 17 of the Sustainable Development Goals, inclusive of elimination of poverty and hunger by 2030. By achieving the bond challenge by restoring 350 million hectares of degraded and deforested lands around the world would create to US 9 trillion in net benefits. A restoration through afforestry alone has the potential to increase food security for 1.3 billion people. 10 billion tsunami project or program is built on the successful initiative our Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province's billion tree afforestation project. The outcome of billion tree afforestation project have been duly acknowledged by the World Economic Forum, United Nations Environment Programme, Bond Challenge, and other international bodies and fora. With plantation of 1 billionth tree on 27th May 2021, the government of Pakistan kicked off the goal of 10 billion tree plantation across the country. The government of Pakistan has launched the Ecosystem Restoration Initiative, ESRI, for facilitating transition towards environmentally resilient Pakistan. The initiative also seeks to establish an independent, transparent, and comprehensive financial mechanism in Pakistan called Ecosystem Restoration Fund, ESRF, to finance the projects and programs under the initiative. Recently, we have launched Protected Area Initiative to develop 15 model protected areas across the country to conserve over more than 7,000 square kilometers of land area. Greening of China-Pakistan CPEC initiative is underway, through which a planned coal power plant is being replaced with 2 renewable energy projects to reduce carbon footprints. During the current situation of pandemic, our Ministry of Climate Change has launched a green economic stimulus which aims at promoting environmental activities which have economic impacts. We are committed to reduce risk from glacial lake outburst floods, GLOF, in northern areas of Pakistan to strengthen the resilience of community. These are some of the green initiatives Pakistan has undertaken. I have quoted the figure from global and national data for the readers to give an overview of the situation. But we have to think beyond figures, and we have to think green to achieve the real purpose of restoring our ecosystem for survival of our own and future generation. I would like to thank SDPI and WFP for bringing together experts to discuss issues and ecosystems, their various dimensions and their impacts on people and the planet. I once again thank you for your participation in the discussion on such an important topic. Pakistan Zindabad, thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Minister, for your message. Now, time is very limited, but if you have any question to panelists, kindly come up with your question, very brief. If there is something online, if some question online or from the audience, then we can take it up. If not, then I would, please. Just take the mic at the bottom. Up कर लें इसको.
Thank you. You see, this planet belongs to all of us, and That's why when we are talking of ecosystem restoration, ecosystem protection, we can't only leave things to be done by the governments. It is the climate threats, they are so predominant that no single government in the world can tackle them, no single society can tackle them, and no single individual can tackle them. We have to act together collectively in order to tackle these. And that reminds me of the fact that even if we don't receive anything from climate financing funds or from developed nations, we have to use our indigenous resources. We have to adapt to the changing climate, and we have to protect and preserve our ecosystem. So all these things that we need to do, it's a sort of a moral binding on us if we really want to leave a livable planet for our future generations. So small steps at individual level, collective steps at a societal level, and then of course a lot at government level, both federal as well as provincial, that needs to be done. And within this context, the role of private sector is quite important, and we have to take private sector along. So it's not only civil society and governments and international funders or donors, but private sectors as well. Again, it's a collective effort.
Thank you very much. I guess no more questions. Then I would like to thank all of you who participated here in person. But under the COVID SOPs, we have invited very limited gathering here. And thank you all those who have participated online for this session. My special thanks to the Honorable Minister for the message. And then I'm thankful to Dr. Abbas Suleri that he's here with us. And thank you, Dr. Mushtaq Ahmed Memon Saab, Adam Savelli, Mr. Iftikhar Saab, Dr. Sehrish, Dr. Babar Shahbaz, and Salman Danish for their presentation. With this, I would like to thank you again. Thank you so much. And now it is close of the session. Thanks.